When we were preparing our flex budget performance report, we said the flex budget variance can be attributable to anything else besides an increase or decrease in sales volume. Well, to make better managerial decisions, let's break that down by doing some variance analysis. So we're going to take all the numbers reported in our flex budget variance column and get a little more detail. And to do variance analysis, we need a few things. The first thing we need is our standards. And for MAD cleaning, their standards were that they were going to use 2 pounds of direct materials per bottle at a cost of $1 per pound. Each bottle was going to require about 0.1 direct labor hours to produce, and they were going to pay their employees a standard of $20 per hour. They were going to use direct labor hours as their cost driver, so the amount of the driver that went into each bottle produced is that 0.1 direct labor hours. And they were going to incur variable manufacturing overhead at a rate of $20 per every direct labor hour. And for fixed overhead, they were going to also use direct labor hours as their driver, so they're going to incur 0.1 hours of the driver for each bottle they made and incur fixed overhead at a rate of $6 per hour. So the first thing you need is your standards. The second thing you need is your actuals. And for our actual information we have here that MAD Cleaning used 19,500 pounds of direct materials in their actual production and did so at a cost of $20,475. Their employees actually worked 980 direct labor hours during the month of January, and they did so at an actual cost of $19,796. And then their actual variable manufacturing overhead incurred was $22,000. And their actual fixed manufacturing overhead incurred was $6,200. So now that we have all of our standards and our actual information, we can start breaking down those variances. The first step we need to do is figure out what our actual cost per unit was for direct materials and direct labor. So our actual direct materials cost per pound and our actual direct labor cost per hour. And to do so, you're going to take your actual cost of direct materials, which given in the information was $20,475, and you're going to divide it by your actual pounds used, which was 19,500. And if we spent, in actuality, $20,475 on direct materials, of which we used 19,500 pounds, that means that we paid $1.05 per pound to acquire the direct materials which we used in production. For direct labor, our actual cost of direct labor was $19,796. Our employees, our direct laborers, actually worked 980 hours during the period. So if we paid $19,796 to our employees to work 980 hours, if we divide 19,796 by 980, we determined that we actually paid our employees on average about $20.20 per hour. Moving on to our variances, the first one we're going to have is direct materials cost variance. What portion of that direct materials flex budget variance we had on our flex budget performance report could be attributed to an increase or decrease in the cost of the direct materials that we acquired? Well, what did we actually pay per pound of direct materials? We just figured it out. We paid, in actuality, $1.05 per pound for direct materials during the period. Well, what was our standard? What did we say we were going to pay when we set our master budget at the beginning of the period? Going back up to our standards, we see that our standard for direct materials is we expected to pay $1 per pound. So we paid 5 cents more per pound than we thought we were going to. Well, we actually used, according to our actual information, 19,500 pounds of direct materials. So if we paid 5 cents more a pound, found by taking the difference between the actual cost of $1.05 per pound and the standard of $1 per pound, for each of the 19,500 pounds that we used in production, that means that we spent $975 more for direct materials than we proposed in our budget, which can be attributed to the fact that we had to pay more per pound of direct materials than we budgeted for. And since we're paying more than our standard said we should have, that is an unfavorable variance. That's bad. On to direct materials efficiency variance over here. Our first thing is our actual pounds of direct materials used. Well, we just had that a second ago. That was at 19,500. Now we need to figure out what our standard quantity of direct materials used is based upon our actual level of production. And if we go back to our flex budget performance report, we actually produced and sold 10,500 units during the period. Well, back to our variance analysis, if we take that 10,500 units that we actually produced during the period and account for the fact that each one of those, according to our standards, should have taken 2 pounds of direct materials per bottle produced, then those 10,500 units that we actually made at 2 pounds per bottle should have caused us to have to use 21,000 pounds in production. So we used 1,500 less pounds than we should have, according to our standard, to make the actual number of units which we produced and sold. Well, our standard cost per pound of direct materials, according to our standards, was $1. It was $1 per pound. So if we used 19,500 pounds, which is less than the 21,000 that we should have, and each one of those should have cost us $1 per pound, that means that we spent $1,500 less on materials, which can be attributed to the fact that we were way more efficient. We got the same number of units produced for way less material than we thought we were going to, and since it caused us to spend less money, that is favorable for our company. So we have a favorable $1,500 direct material efficiency variance. And if you add 1,500 and call this like a negative because it's unfavorable, negative 975 together, you come up with positive $525, which just so happens to be our favorable variance over here. So we broke down that $525 flex budget variance we had into, was it because of cost, or was it because we used less materials than we thought we were going to? And as we can see right here, we ended up, cost was actually higher. That, decrease in the overall cost of materials is really attributed to the fact that we just used way less than we thought we were going to. Moving on to our direct labor cost variance. Well, what was our actual cost per direct labor hour that our employees worked? We just calculated that up above. Our actual direct labor cost per hour was $20.20. Well, what was our standard? What number did we set as an hourly wage that we proposed we were going to pay when we were making our budget in the first place? Our standard cost for direct labor was $20, which means that we spent 20 cents more per hour than we thought we were going to when we set our budget at the beginning of the period. Well, if we take the difference between those two, the 20 cents, and we multiply it by the actual amount of the direct labor hours that our employees work, we get the portion of our labor variance, which we can attribute to the cost of our employees per hour. And the actual amount of direct labor hours used, according to our information, was 980 hours. So we take the difference between our actual cost per direct labor hour of 2020 and our standard of 20, and we multiply it by that 980 hours that our employees actually worked. And when we do that, we come up with 196. So we spent $196 more for direct labor during the period, which we attributed to the fact that we had to pay a higher hourly wage to our employees than we planned on doing so. So that is unfavorable because our actual cost was higher than our standard cost. Moving on to our direct labor efficiency variance, which is the amount of difference between our budgeted labor costs and our actual labor costs, which can be attributed to the fact that our employees had to work more or less hours to get the job done. So we're going to start with our actual amount of direct labor hours used. And the actual amount of direct labor hours used, we already have in our numbers, so I'm going to steal it from right here, was 980. The standard quantity of direct labor hours used is how many hours it should have taken our employees to produce these units given the actual amount of units that we produced and sold, and the standard that we set forth at the beginning of the period for how long it should have taken to make each unit. So if we go back to our flex budget performance report, we see that our actual units sold was 10,500. Well, if we go and we multiply that by the time it should have taken to make 1 unit, which of 0.1 hours, our direct labor quantity standard, that means that to produce those 10,500 bottles at a rate of 0.1, or a bottle every 0.1 hours, it should have taken us 1,050 hours to make them. So we got the job done in 70 hours less than we thought we were going to. Well, if we go and multiply that difference by our standard cost per direct labor hour, which according to our information, we propose we're going to pay $20 per hour to our direct laborers, it's going to give us the amount of difference we had in direct labor, which can be attributable to the fact that our employees, in this case, got the job done way faster than we thought we were going to. And 980 minus 1,050 in parentheses times our $20 standard, that's 1,400. So $1,400 of the savings that we had on direct labor can be attributed to the fact that our employees just didn't need to work as many hours to produce the units as we thought we were going to. And since they didn't work those hours, we didn't have to pay them. Moving on to our variable overhead cost variance. And we start our variable overhead cost variance by taking our actual variable overhead cost per direct labor hour. And we can do that by going back up to our information and finding our actual variable overhead costs, which were 22,000, and dividing it by the quantity of the driver that we use, which is the actual amount of direct labor hours that our employees worked of 980, and 22,000 divided by 980 means that we actually incurred $22.45 of variable overhead for each hour that our employees worked during the period. Well, that was not the standard that we set forth at the beginning of the period. According to our standards, our budgeted amounts per unit, we expected to incur variable overhead at a rate of $20 for every direct labor hour our employees worked. So we spent $2.45 more per hour than we thought we were going to in our budget. Well, if we multiply that by the actual quantity of our cost driver, which is the actual number of direct labor hours used, which we've already determined to be 980, we're going to figure out what portion of our overall variance, our flex budget variance in variable overhead, can be attributed to the fact that we just incurred more costs than we thought we were going to. And if we take 2245 minus 20 in parentheses and multiply that by 980, we come up with 2,400. So we spent $2,400 more on variable overhead because the costs of those variable overhead things, repairs and maintenance, paying our indirect laborers, acquiring indirect material, the cost of that was more than we predicted. So that is an unfavorable variance. Now we have our variable overhead efficiency variance, which is the portion of the difference in our flex budget amount for variable overhead, which can be attributed to the fact that we did more or less of the activity which we think caused us to incur variable overhead, in this case working direct labor hours. So our actual amount of the driver is 980, our driver's direct labor hours. The standard quantity of direct labor hours, we already figured out a couple things above. Our employees should have taken 1,050 hours to produce all of those units given our actual level of production. Well, our standard variable overhead cost per unit of the driver per direct labor hour was 20 bucks. So if we go and we take in parentheses 980, our actual amount of direct labor hours, minus 1,050, what we should have had, our standard quantity of direct labor hours used, and multiply that by our standard cost per direct labor hour, we get $1,400. What we're saying here is that our employees working hours causes us to incur the most variable overhead. And we saved on variable overhead because they had to do less of that activity because they got the job done way faster than they thought they were going to. So that is a favorable variance for us. And just check it, we go back to our FBPR. We see that overall we spent $1,000 more for variable overhead than we should have according to our flex budget. Breaking it down further, why is that? Well, it's not because we had to do more of the activity that caused us to incur overhead to get the job done. It's because the actual rate cost of how we incur overhead was much higher than we thought we were going to. Moving on to our fixed cost variance, the easiest one of them all. What were our actual fixed costs during the period? We can go back to our flex budget performance report, and we see that our actual fixed costs for the period were $6,200. Well, what did we budget for? According to our flex budget performance report, we budgeted in our static budget originally to have $6,000 in fixed costs, which means we spent $200 more on fixed costs than we thought we were going to. And that is unfavorable for us. So we're going to make that bad. And then our last one is our fixed cost volume variance. And for this, we find the difference between our budgeted fixed costs and our allocated fixed costs. Well, our budgeted fixed costs we just had, $6,000. We just took that from our flex budget performance report. For our allocated fixed costs, what we're going to do is we're going to take our actual number of units produced and multiply it by both of the standards for our driver. So it's going to be our actual units produced times the rate at which we allocate fixed costs to our products times the quantity, the standard that we set forth for how much of the driver we should incur for each unit that we make. So if we go back to our flex budget performance report, we actually made 10,500 units. Well, let's multiply that by both of our standards for our fixed overhead. And that was, we should have allocated at a rate of $6 per hour that our employees worked, and each bottle that we produced should have taken 0.1 hours to make, which means at that rate, those 10,500 units we produced should have had $6,300 of fixed costs allocated to them. So the difference between our budgeted fixed costs and our allocated fixed costs is $300. And that is a favorable variance. Why is that a favorable variance? Well, if we had a predetermined rate for fixed costs being allocated to each unit that we made, and we end up allocating more than we budgeted for, that means we had to have made more units than we planned on at the beginning of the period. And making more units is always good for the company. So we have a favorable fixed cost volume variance of $300. And as the last part of your comprehensive assignment, you are asked in approximately 2 paragraphs to use the results of your variance analysis to write a recommendation to this company on how they can make things better. And to save you guys the time of me sitting here typing, I'll just talk it out. What you want to do is you want to look at your variances and use what they call management by exception, which is finding the biggest variance, be they favorable or unfavorable, and figuring out how can we fix this. So our biggest variance to start with is our variable overhead cost variance of $2,400. We need to figure out some way that we can lower our variable overhead costs. Well, what goes into variable overhead? Again, it's indirect materials, indirect labor is 2 of the things. So we can look to try to find a cheaper supplier where we get our indirect materials from. Maybe we have too many indirect laborers on staff. We can, unfortunately for the gentleman, cut a custodian or cut a security guard. That would save us on variable overhead. It's possible that a lot of that is due to repairs and maintenance on our machinery. Maybe we can look to upgrade to some new machinery because we have a lemon. There's a ton of different things that it could be. But in some way, this company is going to have to lower the actual cost that they pay for variable overhead. What else is a very high variance? We have a direct materials efficiency variance of $1,500 that is favorable. Even though it's favorable, the question you need to ask is, why did we use so much less material than we thought we were going to? Are our employees skimping, watering down our solution to our all-purpose cleaner? If that's the case, that's not good for the company, because all of a sudden your cleaner doesn't clean as well as you thought it was going to be. So even if your variance is favorable, you still have to look into it. Still have to go to the respective manager, and for the direct materials efficiency manager, it would be the production manager, to make sure that your product is being prepared in the way that you thought it was going to be. And it's also entirely possible in this case that the standard set forth at the beginning was just simply too high. It doesn't take 2 pounds of direct materials to make a bottle of this all-purpose cleaner, in which case you would go again to your production manager, who is responsible for setting that figure in the budget, and be like, yeah, when you have to do your budgets next period, it can't be 2 pounds because we're not using 2 pounds. You got to lower that to 1.8 pounds or something along those lines. So as a good manager, you're going to go through, you're going to look at your variances, find the highest one first, wrap your head around why that could be, and then in your written recommendation, it's just that. Find your biggest variances and find a way that you can look in to improve it if it's unfavorable, or if it's a very favorable variance, make sure that it's actually still benefiting your company, even though it's cheaper in cost. Because while it's good to cheap out, it's not good to cheap out at the expense of the quality of your product.